Under this pandemic, lots of rumors have been circulating, if we go all the way back to the beginning, that incidences of domestic violence and divorce rates have been on the increase under COVID-19. Well, we're trying to find out whether or not these are rumors or whether or not we have hard data on those facts. To that end, we have invited Dr. Robyn Bourgeois. She's an associate professor at Brock's Department of Women and Gender Studies. Welcome, Dr. Bourgeois. It's great to see you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So maybe you can help us debunk whether or not this is a rumor that we actually have hard data on the increase of domestic violence.
I think we have some ideas. I mean, we can extrapolate right now because we know what the rates of violence were prior to the pandemic. And we know that 1 in 3 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime in Canada. We know that every day in Canada, 3 women are murdered by their partners. So we can stand to argue, actually, given what we know about this topic, that those statistics are probably accurate, and that I don't know how much research we have at this point. It's still really early, right? This is 6 months in, but we can certainly, identify factors that suggest that those rates are going to be sky high.
Those data that you throw out there are gruesome in their numbers. That's a terrible thought
Exactly.
with those numbers. And what will it take to reduce those numbers?
That's a really big question because there's things that we can do on the ground to help reduce that number. That's like everyday practical things. And those are important. And I want to talk about those in a minute. But the bigger issue is that there's social systemic issues that are going to have to be changed. We're going to have to address things like patriarchy. We're going to have to address things like racism and colonialism. People don't think that's tied in, but it is tied in. And we're going to have to talk about money in the economy and who makes money and who doesn't make money, because all of those factors contribute to what happens when we talk about domestic violence and gender-based violence. So we're going to have to do some big structural change, but I think there are things that we can do on the ground that are really, they sound hard sometimes, but I think they're kind of general things. We can do things like educate our young men, for example. I think there's a real push out there that instead of telling young girls what they can do to protect themselves, we need to do more to tell young men in particular about, it's not okay to rape women. It's not okay to abuse a woman. And I think that's a really great starting point. And it can happen as, my kids are 7, 8, and 3, and they have learned about consent from the time they were born. So it's not things that, it's not a big change, but we can do those little things with our kids, for example. We can offer supports for folks so that we don't get in these situations like where we have a home that's become just a toxic environment because there's so much dysfunction happening. So it's a big issue. We're going to have to really deal with a lot of things. We're going to have to deal with equitable wages. We're going to have to deal with access to housing and supports. All of those things play a role in this.
You have
Absolutely.
a study that you're starting with some of your third-year students. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so one of the things we offer in women and gender studies is that our students do practicums. And historically, that's meant going to work in nonprofit organizations that have a gendered focus. Of course, COVID this year, that couldn't happen. And so I ended up in a discussion with Jillian's Place, who I worked with a few times. And we started talking about what could we do together. And they said one of the things that they're concerned about is that there is actually, limited data about how COVID is impacting people. And there's only been, at least we're aware of, 2 studies about COVID and domestic violence. And they're really preliminary. They're things just pulling off of past research. So we've talked, and we're going to collaborate. My students are going to work with Jillian's Place, and we're going to try to study the impacts of COVID on gender-based violence and domestic violence here in the Niagara region as our hope. We want to capture what's been happening since the pandemic has begun in terms of violence and what that means for survivors and in terms of support. And so we're actually looking at doing some concrete research in the term, like probably end up with a study out of this, but also doing some creative work around here where we tell those stories of people who've had these experiences, and we have multimedia involved. So it's kind of exciting, but it's important work because we don't have, at least in the Niagara region, we can guess, and we can get evidence from the shelters and different
Right.
supports, but we actually need to pull this all together, right, and see what that big picture is.
Well, we'll wait to see the results of that study. Dr. Robyn Bourgeois from Brock
Great.
University, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.